Robin Williams was not born into poverty, nor into one of those families where every penny is carefully counted before dinner. His starting point was far more comfortable. His father was an important executive at the Ford Corporation, his mother a former model with Southern charm and a decent pedigree to boast of. In other words, a house full of money, connections, status, spacious rooms, and house staff to top it all off. It seemed like the perfect setting for a child. But reality turned out to be much darker. Instead of warmth and parental attention, little Robin spent most of his time with the maid. Yes, you heard that right. She was the one who most often listened to his first clumsy attempts at making someone laugh. The boy grew up quiet, shy, and a bit overweight. At school he felt like an outsider, and his classmates didn't miss an opportunity to remind him of it. Robin hid his sadness and loneliness in games with his toys. He gave voices to his toy soldiers, staged entire performances in his bedroom, and back then nobody had any idea these were the first rehearsals of a future master of improvisation. He would later say he was short, shy, fat, and lonely, and the only way to survive inside this cocktail of insecurities was to laugh. His only real audience was his mother. Laurie had a particular sense of humor. She could go out in public with a piece of tape stuck to her tooth and have the whole room rolling with laughter. For Robin, this was a revelation. He realized that laughter was the key to attention and love. If he made his mother laugh, he existed. From that moment on, humor became his main weapon and his way to survive. The family moved around often. When he was 12, they relocated to Detroit, where they didn't just live in a house, but in an estate. 40 rooms, 20 acres of land, a proper mansion. But the enormous corridors only made the loneliness louder. At school, things were a bit better. He studied well, joined the wrestling team, even became class president. Yet at the same time, he remained a target for jokes because of his weight and oddness. The class clown was still in the making, and while others saw just an awkward boy, Robin was already inventing voices and characters for his imaginary theater. When Robin turned 16, his father retired, and the family moved to California. That was where the real turning point began. At Redwood High School, he finally found a stage where he could shine. School plays became his platform, and his funny improvisations opened doors to new friendships. It was there he was first officially recognized as the funniest student. The irony? At the same time, he was also voted least likely to succeed. Who could have imagined then that this unlikely boy would grow up to be a Hollywood legend? The luxury that surrounded him throughout childhood never managed to replace the lack of simple human warmth, and it was precisely this absence that made him into the man we know today. He learned to fill the emptiness with laughter, and he turned loneliness into the engine of his creativity. Inside, he always remained that boy sitting on the floor, talking to his toys. On the outside, however, he learned how to command the attention of entire audiences and keep millions of people in the palm of his hand. The story of Robin Williams's childhood is not a fairy tale about a happy rich kid, but a drama about a boy who lacked love. He grew up in a golden cage, but found ways to bend the bars with humor. His mother gave him the gift of absurdity, his loneliness taught him imagination, and the school stage became the first arena of his future career. If you think about it, his whole life was one long attempt to fill that very childhood emptiness. The world laughed when he joked, and in return he received what he craved the most: attention, love, and the feeling that he truly mattered. Me, I'm a little prince in a golden cage. Do you think a wealthy childhood is an unlimited ticket to happiness? A huge mansion, 20 acres of land, servants, expensive toys, a father who was a boss at Ford Motor Company, and a glamorous high society mother. Sounds like a fairy tale. But if you look closer, the fairy tale of little Robin Williams looked more like a sad art house drama. Wealth was there, but warmth was missing. Robin was born in 1951 in Chicago. His father, Robert Fitzgerald Williams, held a high-ranking position at Ford, and obviously spent more time with spreadsheets than with his own son. His mother, Laurie McLaurin, wasn't exactly a stay-at-home mom either. Fashion parties, charity evenings, endless trips. While the grown-ups were making the world better, with a martini glass in hand, little Robin was left with his most loyal audience, maids and his toys. I was an only child. So yes, for a long time it was just me and my dolls. He admitted years later. Imagine the scene. A luxurious mansion, dozens of rooms, and in the middle of it, a boy talking to plastic soldiers. It's a movie in itself. And here lies the main paradox. That very loneliness gave the world one of the greatest comedians. To snatch even a bit of attention from his mother, he found a universal weapon: laughter. The first laugh is always the hook. He once said, "For me, it was my mother." Little Robin figured it out. If you could make Mom laugh, you existed, at least for a moment. And let's be honest, this is a classic story. A child without attention builds his armor. Some escape into books, some into sports, and Robin chose humor. Bonus point: his mother was witty herself. She could show up at a charity ball in a gorgeous dress with a piece of black tape stuck across her teeth. That was her way of joking, and the boy learned early that laughter could be a weapon and a bridge at the same time. But don't think he was immediately the life of the party. At school, Robin was teased, and his weight became a reason for ridicule. He was chubby, quiet, withdrawn. And then came the lifeboat, his sense of humor. He started joking, mimicking, escaping into comedy before anyone could hurt him for real. Laughter became his bulletproof vest. It's no surprise he once ended up at a school psychologist. But for the doctor, it was no easy task, because instead of tears, the boy gave mini-shows. Why cry when you can perform a sketch with accents and characters? That's the absurdity of his childhood. On paper, he had it all: money, family heritage, social status. But the main ingredient, attention from his parents, was absent. It's like he was given a golden ticket to Disneyland, but the gates were never opened. As a result, his most reliable friend became his imagination. And that imagination, as we know, made him not just a friend to millions of viewers, but the so-called Einstein of comedy. But here's the bitter aftertaste in this glossy picture. All those lonely years left cracks inside him. Robin grew up convinced that just being himself wasn't enough. He had to joke, to entertain, to play characters, or else he'd be invisible. A joke wasn't a choice. It was survival. It sounds poetic, but imagine the weight of that. Remember his words. "I was always trying to make my mother laugh. That was my way of connecting." Smiles became currency. Jokes became a way to buy love. The irony? The man who made the world cry with laughter had grown up without genuine laughter at home. In truth, little Robin lived in a golden cage. Everything glittered, everything shined, but there was no key to open the door. Comedy became his escape route. First for his mother, then for classmates, and soon for the entire world. So if someone asked, what made Robin Williams the great comedian he became? The answer is simple. Not wealth, not family name, not education. It was laughter, born in the silence of a mansion where a boy just wanted to be noticed. And yes, here's the paradoxical moral of the story. To become a genius, Robin Williams first had to be the loneliest child on 20 acres of land. Robin Williams, his first steps in comedy, or how to survive when the audience spits at you. When we think of Robin Williams today, we picture that whirlwind of energy, the fireworks of words, accents, and impressions. But very few people know that all of this wasn't born on Hollywood red carpets or inside cozy studios. No, Robin's real school was much tougher: noisy bars, drunk audiences, and stages where you could be booed off, doused with water, or even spat on. Welcome to stand-up in the 1970s. After his first experiments with theatre in college and the collapse of his would-be political career, his father dreamed of a diplomat and instead got a clown, Robin found himself on stage in California clubs. His career literally started from behind the counter, first as a bartender, then as a performer. That's when fate flipped the switch. No script, no rehearsals, only raw improvisation. And the audience? Let's just say it was not the easiest crowd. In the room were tipsy workers, musicians, students, sex workers, and anyone else you could imagine. Most of them were loud, impatient, and half-drunk. If you made them laugh, you survived. If not, they could shout you down, throw a glass, or pour beer on you. And this is where Robin's signature style was born. Fast, chaotic, no pauses. He never gave the audience a chance to take aim. He later explained it himself. You go into a bar, and the people there basically own the club. If you don't grab them in the first few seconds, you're done. That's why I started developing this style, like rapid-fire synapses. You throw out an idea, then race off to the next one before they can catch you. Let's be honest, this wasn't about inspiration. This was survival training, plain and simple. While a regular actor rehearsed in the calm of a theatre hall, Robin was learning to perform under a barrage of beer bottles and insults. Once, someone actually threw water in his face during a set. What did he do? He acted out an entire swimming pool scene on the spot. The crowd roared with laughter, and Robin discovered something vital. Humiliation could be turned into ammunition. That's where the famous whirlwind of improvisation came from. Not because he wanted to look original, but because it was safer that way. He cracked jokes faster than people could humiliate him. He hid behind dozens of characters, disguising his real self. Out of that came the phenomenon later called the Einstein of comedy. But don't forget the context. California in the 1970s meant drugs, sex, rock and roll, and absolute chaos. Stand-up wasn't just entertainment, it was part of the cultural revolution. Each performance was a blend of psychedelic music, political satire, and free love. No wonder so many comedians of that era burned out on cocaine and alcohol. Robin landed right in the middle of it. He saw brilliant minds self-destruct right before his eyes. And he wasn't exactly innocent himself. He admitted, "Comedy is a violent business. On stage, you run yourself up to the ceiling, and afterward you have to crash. And the crash usually comes with alcohol or drugs." That's how the seeds of his future problems were planted, seeds that would explode later when his career skyrocketed. But at the same time, those smoky clubs were where he sharpened his superpower, the ability to switch instantly between accents, voices, and characters. One moment he was a stern professor, the next a drunken sailor, and then suddenly a hippie angel. Nobody knew what was coming next, and that unpredictability became his greatest weapon. Critics of the time noticed, Williams didn't just land in the middle of the comedy revolution, he was leading it. While others came in with neatly prepared jokes, Robin turned the stage into pure chaos. And chaos was exactly what the audience wanted. Here's the funny part. From the outside, it looked effortless, like he was just making it all up on the spot. But in reality, behind every spontaneous gag, there was work. He carefully collected characters from the street, memorized voices, studied gestures. The world around him was his endless material. Many of his colleagues back then thought he was, well, a little too strange. He wasn't the classic comedian with a structured setup and punchline. He was a storm, pulling the audience into a stream of consciousness that never seemed to end. And that's exactly what made him unique. For Robin, the stage was a battlefield. And let's be honest, he won. From a barroom jokester, he grew into the face of the comedy renaissance. Soon producers would notice him, and television would come calling. But all of that only happened because, in those early days, he didn't run off stage in shame. He turned every insult, every splash of beer, into fuel. So the moral is simple. If you see a comedian on stage who seems to be inventing everything on the spot, remember, it may not just be talent. Sometimes it's the only way they've learned to survive. Robin Williams and Superman. The odd couple at Juilliard. If you think all great comedians are born funny, you're wrong. Some of them are forged in fire, or rather in the strict halls of theatre schools where Shakespeare is treated like the Bible and laughter is considered a mortal sin. For Robin Williams, that place was the prestigious Juilliard School in New York City. And here's the kicker. His classmate and eventual best friend was none other than Christopher Reeve, the man who would become Superman. Yes, the wild-haired clown and the chiseled man of steel sat in the same classrooms, proving once again that life writes better scripts than Hollywood. In 1973, Robin made the bold move to leave the smoky comedy clubs and actually study acting like a serious artist. He was one of only 20 students accepted that year, and one of just 2 chosen by the legendary John Houseman for an advanced program. The other golden pick, Christopher Reeve. Imagine that casting call, the handsome, statuesque leading man and the hairy, manic little fireball. Together, they looked like a buddy comedy waiting to happen. Reeve later described his first impression of Robin as watching a balloon that had just been released. The guy never stopped moving, bouncing off walls, words firing out of him at machine gun pace. Reeve, tall and composed, was in awe. He had the face of a Greek god, but next to him was this human hurricane who couldn't stand still for 10 seconds. They were opposites in every way. Reeve was polished, Robin was messy, Reeve was classically trained, Robin was an improvisational madman. Yet somehow it clicked. They became inseparable, like the oddest odd couple in Juilliard history. Houseman, the Grand Master himself, quickly realized he had a problem. What do you teach a genius who refuses to color inside the lines? Robin could do anything, and half the time the school didn't know what to do with him. One teacher even admitted that the conservative training methods just didn't fit Williams. "Mr. Williams, the theatre needs you," Gerald Friedman told him. Translation: "Go be a star, because Juilliard can't keep up with you." Meanwhile, Robin was grinding. He wasn't just clowning around, he was performing in New York nightclubs at night, waiting tables to survive, and attending classes by day. This was no silver spoon rich kid drifting into showbiz. He was hustling, pulling double shifts, Shakespeare by morning, drunks by evening. His classmates might have been dreaming about Broadway, but Robin was getting real-world battle scars in the clubs, sharpening the very weapon that would make him a legend: improvisation. And then there was Reeve. Tall, serious, disciplined Christopher Reeve, who at that point had no idea he was destined to wear tights and a cape. Robin and Reeve formed a brotherhood. They balanced each other out. Robin dragged Reeve into madness, and Reeve grounded Robin in reality. If Robin was chaos, Reeve was order. If Robin was tequila shots at 2 a.m., Reeve was black coffee at dawn. Together, they created a kind of yin-yang friendship that would last for decades. When Reeve had his tragic horse-riding accident in 1995, Robin didn't just send flowers. He dressed up as a Russian doctor, burst into the hospital room with a fake accent, and told Reeve he was there to perform an exam, including a rectal one. Reeve laughed for the first time since the accident. That was Robin's superpower, not flight or X-ray vision, but the ability to pull someone back from the abyss with a single joke. Later, Robin would pay many of Reeve's medical bills, support his family, and remain by his side until Reeve's death in 2004. But let's rewind. In Juilliard, this friendship was still in its awkward baby phase. Robin was exploding with energy. Reeve was quietly judging this Tasmanian devil in human form. Yet Reeve recognized what few people saw back then. Beneath the wild hair and endless jokes was a character actor with depth. Reeve himself admitted that Robin wasn't just funny, he was terrifyingly talented. He could be Jonathan Winters one second and Hamlet the next. That range, Reeve knew, was the mark of someone destined for greatness. The rest of the faculty? They didn't always agree. Some thought Robin was wasting his gift doing nightclub shtick. Houseman even advised him to stop chasing comedy gigs and focus on theatre. Imagine that. "Don't waste your time being a comedian," said one of the most respected men in drama to a guy who would later become the voice of Jeannie, Mrs. Doubtfire, and the DJ in Good Morning, Vietnam. Proof that even geniuses can get it wrong sometimes. Eventually, Robin left Juilliard, not because he failed, but because the school realized they had nothing left to teach him. He was beyond their curriculum. The irony. He didn't graduate, but he graduated Life's comedy school with honors. Meanwhile, Reeve went on to Hollywood and became Superman. And Robin? He became the guy who could make Superman laugh until he cried. Looking back, the friendship between these two men feels almost mythic. The grounded superhero and the manic trickster, walking the same hallways, eating the same cafeteria food, rehearsing scenes no one remembers now. But the bond they built lasted a lifetime. Reeve gave Robin dignity. Robin gave Reeve laughter. And maybe that's the lesson here. Behind every Superman, you need a clown. And behind every clown, you need a Superman. In their case, fate delivered both, in the same class at Juilliard. Robin Williams, the alien who crashed into Hollywood. Sometimes Hollywood careers are carefully built. Agents, auditions, theatre credits, years of paying dues. And sometimes a hairy guy in rainbow suspenders walks onto a sitcom, starts speaking like a Martian on speed, and the entire country goes, "What the hell is that? And why can't I stop watching?" Welcome to Robin Williams' bizarre, accidental rocket ship launch into fame. The year was 1978. America was in love with the squeaky clean sitcom Happy Days. It had jukeboxes, leather jackets, and Fonzie saying, "Aye." It was wholesome, predictable, and exactly the kind of safe TV middle America adored. So, of course, someone in the writer's room had the brilliant, or insane, idea. Hey, what if we add an alien? Yes, an alien. Into a 1950s Milwaukee sitcom. Makes perfect sense, right? Enter Robin Williams. Except he wasn't even supposed to enter. He was a nobody at the time, hustling comedy clubs, barely surviving on gigs. Then came the audition. Or rather, the anti-audition. The producers asked him to sit down. Robin, being Robin, plopped into the chair, literally upside down. Who sits on their head in an audition? Only Robin. They hired him on the spot. No script read, no polite handshake. Just, "You're weird. You're hired." His role. Mork from Ork, a hyperactive alien who lands in Milwaukee and befriends Richie Cunningham. Think about it. The wholesome world of poodle skirts and soda fountains suddenly invaded by a manic extraterrestrial in suspenders yelling, "Nanu, Nanu!" It shouldn't have worked. It should have been the dumbest idea in sitcom history. Instead, it was electric. The guest spot was supposed to be a one-off gimmick, a throwaway joke in a tired sitcom. But when Robin showed up, it was like a bomb went off in television comedy. He wasn't acting. He was detonating. Lines flew out of his mouth that weren't in the script. The crew laughed so hard they ruined takes. Henry Winkler, the Fonzie himself, later said, "Working with Robin was like trying to tame a wild animal. You never knew what direction he would run." Viewers at home had the same reaction. Who is this guy? The letters poured in. Ratings spiked. Audiences didn't care about Richie anymore. They wanted the alien. And just like that, Hollywood did what Hollywood always does when it stumbles onto something bizarre that prints money. They gave it its own show. Mork and Mindy was born. And overnight, Robin Williams went from starving comic to the hottest new star in America. He didn't just play Mork, he unleashed him. The rainbow suspenders, the catchphrases, Shazbot, Nanu Nanu, the non-stop improvisation. Half the time, even the writers didn't know what he'd do next. The scripts were basically suggestions. Robin was the show, and audiences ate it up. For the first season, Mork and Mindy was a phenomenon. People tuned in not for the plot, which was usually ridiculous, but to watch this lunatic alien do whatever Robin felt like doing that week. One moment he'd be upside down, the next he'd be inventing a new language, then suddenly crying in the middle of a joke. It was chaos, but it was brilliant chaos. Of course, chaos doesn't always last. By season 2, the network tried to fix the show. They wanted more normal sitcom storylines. Translation: less Robin. And you can probably guess how that went. Ratings dropped. Fans didn't want a normal sitcom. They wanted to see Robin unleashed. By the final season, the magic had fizzled. The show was cancelled. But here's the thing. By then, it didn't matter. Robin didn't need Mork anymore. He had arrived. Hollywood had gotten a taste of his madness, and they wanted more. Movie offers followed. Suddenly, the hairy alien was reading scripts for Popeye, The World According to Garp, and eventually, the roles that would cement him as a superstar. It's almost funny looking back. Robin Williams, who studied Shakespeare at Juilliard, who could recite soliloquies with terrifying precision, didn't get his break playing Hamlet or Macbeth. No, he became famous for being a spastic alien with a catchphrase. Life is cruel like that. Or maybe it's poetic. You can train for Shakespeare all you want, but if your destiny is rainbow suspenders, then rainbow suspenders it is. Still, Mork was the perfect training ground. On that set, Robin learned how to channel his chaos into television timing. He learned how to work with cameras, how to stay funny while staying in character, how to carry a show on his manic shoulders. It was, in its own weird way, his comedy boot camp. And let's be real, America fell in love with him there. For all the serious Oscar-winning roles he'd later play, millions of people always remembered him first as Mork, the alien who made Nanu Nanu a household phrase. So what do we take from this chapter of Robin's life? Maybe this. Sometimes the role you least expect, the one that seems stupid, embarrassing, or beneath you, that's the one that launches you. For Robin Williams, it wasn't the bard, it wasn't the stage, it wasn't even stand-up. It was an alien in Milwaukee. Hollywood didn't plan it. Robin didn't plan it. But when he landed on TV, he landed like Mork's spaceship. Out of nowhere, with a crash, and impossible to ignore. Robin Williams in Popeye. How Hollywood tried to sink him before he could swim. Every superstar has that one movie, the one so bad, so bizarre, that fans pretend it doesn't exist. For Robin Williams, it wasn't some late career flop. No, Hollywood tried to sabotage him right from the start. His big screen debut was Popeye, 1980, a film so weird that even spinach couldn't save it. Let's set the scene. Robin was hot off Mork and Mindy, America's favorite alien, and Hollywood wanted to cash in. The studios were desperate to make him into a movie star, but instead of easing him into something simple, say a quirky romantic comedy, they tossed him into one of the strangest projects of the decade. A live-action Popeye, directed by Robert Altman of all people. Yes, the same Altman known for serious, artsy films like MASH and Nashville. Who thought this was a good idea? Nobody knows. Robin, eager to prove himself, jumped aboard. He figured, hey, how hard can it be? Put on the sailor hat, mumble about spinach, flex those forearms, and boom, Hollywood career secured. What he didn't realize was that he'd just signed up for one of the messiest productions in film history. First problem, the script. Nobody knew what it was supposed to be. Was it a comedy? A musical? A parody? A children's cartoon stretched into 2 hours of live action? The answer turned out to be all of the above, and none of it worked. Robin later joked that half the time he couldn't even understand his own lines because they were written in Popeye's garbled sailor speak. Imagine trying to launch your movie career and spending 2 hours muttering like you've got a mouthful of marbles. Not exactly a recipe for stardom. Second problem, the set. The crew built an entire fake town, Sweet Haven, on the coast of Malta. It looked great on camera, but behind the scenes it was chaos. Cast and crew lived in this bizarre little bubble, cut off from the real world, where everything smelled of seaweed and despair. Robin described it later as like being stuck inside a cartoon that refused to end. Third problem: the critics. Oh boy, the critics. When Popeye hit theaters, they lined up to tear it apart. Words like disaster, incoherent, and train wreck were thrown around generously. Some said it was the end of Robin's career before it even started. The Washington Post went so far as to say the film should be left at the bottom of the sea with the Titanic. Ouch. But here's the twist. Audiences didn't completely hate it. Kids kind of liked the slapstick, the costumes, the goofy songs. The film even made its budget back, though not by much. And while critics mocked Robin's mumbled performance, they also noticed something. The guy had something. Even buried under spinach jokes and sailor gibberish, his charisma shone through. It was clear that Robin Williams wasn't going to sink with this ship. Still, Robin himself wasn't thrilled. He later admitted that making Popeye was like comedy prison. His improvisational style, his greatest weapon, was locked away under a rigid script and a cartoonish character. No freewheeling riffs, no manic voices, no bouncing around like on stage. Just grumbling, flexing, and waiting for Olive Oyl to scream. For a man who could set a room on fire with pure energy, it was torture. But here's the thing about disasters. Sometimes they build resilience. Popeye toughened Robin up. It taught him that Hollywood was not a comedy club. You couldn't win over the critics by making fun of them or improvising your way out of a bad script. He learned that film stardom required patience, discipline, and occasionally swallowing your pride along with a can of spinach. And let's not forget, Popeye gave Robin something priceless, his first taste of movie star life. The paycheck was bigger, the production was grander, and even if the critics called it a disaster, it proved that Hollywood was willing to bet big money on him. For every headline mocking Popeye, there was still the undeniable fact: Robin Williams had arrived on the big screen. Looking back now, Popeye has become a cult film. Some people actually defend it as misunderstood genius. Others rewatch it purely for nostalgia. And a few hardcore fans even call it Altman's secret masterpiece. Let's be real. That's a stretch. But in its own weird way, the film has aged better than anyone expected. As for Robin, he survived. Barely. After Popeye, he had to work hard to rebuild his reputation. Luckily, he had the talent, and Hollywood loves a comeback. Within a few years, he was starring in Good Morning, Vietnam, and Dead Poets Society, roles that proved he wasn't just a novelty act in suspenders or a mumbling sailor. He was a real actor, with range, depth, and power. So maybe Popeye was a disaster. Maybe it nearly sank him. But here's the irony. Without that rocky start, Robin might not have fought so hard to prove himself later. Sometimes you need to crash and burn before you soar. And in Robin's case, he soared higher than anyone ever expected, from a failed sailor to an Oscar-winning legend. The lesson: don't judge a comedian by his spinach. Robin Williams in Good Morning, Vietnam. When comedy went to war, by the mid-'80s, Robin Williams had survived his first Hollywood misfire, Popeye, a film so odd it should have come with a warning label, and was stuck in that awkward limbo where everyone knew he was talented, but nobody quite knew what to do with him. Casting directors saw him as that manic guy in suspenders rather than a serious actor. He was funny, sure, but could he act? Could he carry a movie without hiding behind cartoon voices? Then along came Good Morning, Vietnam, 1987, a film that would not only redefine his career, but also show the world that comedy could be as powerful as a grenade. The idea was simple. Take the real-life story of Adrian Cronauer, a U.S. Armed Forces radio DJ in Saigon during the Vietnam War, and let Robin Williams run wild with it. The military wanted Cronauer to play it straight, to boost troop morale with polite banter and patriotic tunes. Adrian, had other plans. He blasted rock and roll, made fun of the brass, and turned his microphone into a weapon of mass hilarity. Now here's the fun part. Most of those on-air sequences, completely improvised. The script basically gave Robin the green light to be Robin. They'd roll the cameras, hand him a mic, and let him riff. What ended up on screen wasn't carefully written dialogue. It was Robin at full throttle, bouncing between accents, voices, sound effects, and jokes so fast the crew often broke down laughing behind the camera. Director Barry Levinson knew exactly what he was doing. He built the movie around Robin's chaos. While other actors rehearsed lines, Robin was unleashed like a comic hurricane. The military officers in the film would look baffled, horrified, or annoyed at his antics. And the thing is, they weren't really acting. Half the time, those reactions were real. Nobody knew what he'd say next. But Good Morning, Vietnam wasn't just a comedy showcase. It was also a war film with serious undertones. This wasn't Mork and Mindy in a uniform. Between the punchlines, there were real scenes of tragedy, fear, and anger. And here's where Robin shocked everyone. He nailed the serious parts, too. Beneath the clown exterior, he delivered raw, heartfelt emotion. He could make you laugh until you cried, then flip the switch and make you cry for real. Audiences were stunned. Critics couldn't believe it. The guy they'd written off as a manic alien was suddenly a credible actor. The performance earned Robin his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. He didn't win, but it didn't matter. Overnight, he went from a goofy TV star to a Hollywood heavyweight. And let's not forget the cultural impact. That booming "Good Morning, Vietnam" became one of the most iconic catchphrases of the 80s. Soldiers repeated it, DJs copied it, it entered the pop culture dictionary. Even people who never saw the movie knew the line. Robin had turned a war movie into something unforgettable, not just for its explosions, but for its laughter. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. The real Adrian Cronauer famously said the film was about 45% accurate, which is a generous way of saying Robin turned him into a lunatic cartoon character. But Cronauer admitted he didn't mind. After all, Robin made him famous. The success of Good Morning, Vietnam changed Robin's entire career trajectory. Before, he was that funny guy. After, he was an actor who could headline serious films. Hollywood finally realized they didn't need to put him in rainbow suspenders or sailor suits. They could hand him complex roles and trust him to deliver. And Robin didn't waste the opportunity. The movie opened the floodgates to a string of career-defining roles. Dead Poets Society, Awakenings, The Fisher King. But it all started in Saigon, with a microphone, a war zone, and a man who refused to play it safe. Looking back, it's ironic. The film that made Robin Williams a serious actor was the one that allowed him to be his most unserious. He didn't tone it down, he cranked it up. But by blending comedy with tragedy, he revealed something nobody had seen before, the full range of his talent. So what's the lesson here? Sometimes the best way to survive a war, whether it's on the battlefield or in Hollywood, is to laugh. And if anyone could make you laugh in the darkest of times, it was Robin Williams. From alien to sailor to war zone DJ, his journey was anything but predictable. But with Good Morning, Vietnam, Robin proved one thing once and for all. He wasn't just a comedian, he was a force of nature. Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society, from class clown to classroom prophet by 1989, Robin Williams had already shouted, "Good Morning, Vietnam!" loud enough to wake up the entire film industry. He'd proved he wasn't just the alien in suspenders or the mumbling sailor from Popeye. He could act. He could hold a dramatic scene without cracking a joke. And just when people thought they had him figured out, along came Dead Poets Society, the film that turned him into the world's most inspirational English teacher, even for people who never set foot in a prep school. Let's be real. On paper, this movie should have been boring. A conservative all-boys academy in the 1950s? Latin chants, stiff uniforms, and parents who treated their kids like little CEOs in training? Not exactly the sexiest setup. But then in walks Robin Williams as John Keating, a teacher who refuses to follow the rules. Suddenly, those uptight halls of Welton Academy were filled with poetry, laughter, and, God forbid, free thinking. Robin's Keating wasn't your average teacher. He didn't stand at the blackboard with chalk and a monotone voice. No, he climbed on desks, quoted Walt Whitman, and made kids rip pages out of their textbooks. He taught them to seize the day, long before Instagram turned it into a cliché hashtag. In short, he was the teacher everyone wished they'd had, but probably didn't. And here's where the magic happened. Robin didn't just act like an inspiring teacher, he was one. Much of his performance was improvised. The famous scene where he has the students march in a courtyard to show the dangers of conformity? Robin played it like a coach, pushing them into awkward steps until they understood the point. The classroom scenes weren't sterile recitations. They were explosions of energy, humor, and heart. Watching him, you could tell the students weren't just acting inspired. They were inspired. Audiences felt it too. People didn't just watch Dead Poets Society, they experienced it. Suddenly, poetry wasn't boring high school homework. It was about life, death, love, rebellion. Parents dragged their kids to see it. Teachers stole Keating's lines for their own classrooms, and millions of viewers walked out of theaters whispering "Carpe diem" like it was a new religion. But let's not forget, this was still Hollywood, which means there had to be tragedy. For all the standing on desks and chanting of "Oh, Captain, my Captain," the movie ends on a devastating note, with a student's suicide brought on by parental pressure. And this is where Robin pulled off something nobody expected. He didn't steal the scene with manic energy or a tearful monologue. He stood still. He let the silence do the work. His restraint made the heartbreak hit even harder. The critics went wild. The Academy took notice. Robin earned his second Oscar nomination for Best Actor. And unlike with Good Morning Vietnam, nobody dared say he was just a comedian. With Keating, he had officially graduated to serious actor territory. Of course, there was some irony. Robin, the man who in real life battled chaos, addiction, and inner demons, was now Hollywood's poster boy for inspiration. He became the guy people quoted when they needed courage to quit their jobs or confess their love. He was the teacher of a generation, whether he wanted the job or not. And the cultural impact? Massive. Even decades later, students still stand on desks at graduation ceremonies to honor Robin's performance. Teachers around the world still use Dead Poets Society as proof that education should be about passion, not just memorization. And Carpe Diem has been tattooed on more arms than anyone could count. But here's the scandalous truth nobody talks about. Robin wasn't always a Carpe Diem kind of guy. Off-screen, he wrestled with insecurity and darkness. He didn't see himself as the all-knowing mentor the public adored. Playing Keating was almost like therapy, an idealized version of who he wanted to be. Maybe that's why it worked so well. He wasn't preaching from a place of perfection. He was reaching for something he, too, longed to grasp. So what did Dead Poets Society do for Robin Williams' career? It cemented him as more than a funny man. It gave him gravitas. Hollywood realized they could cast him in films where humor and tragedy collided, where he could make you laugh and then rip your heart out in the same scene. Without Keating, there would be no Good Will Hunting, no Awakenings, no The Fisher King. And what did it do for the rest of us? It gave us permission to dream a little louder, to question authority, to stand on desks when life got too monotonous, and maybe, just maybe, to look at poetry as something other than dusty lines on a page. Robin Williams as John Keating wasn't just a role, it was a revolution in a tweed jacket. He reminded us that words matter, ideas matter, and that sometimes the only way to really live is to seize the damn day before it slips away. So if you ever wonder what made Robin Williams more than a comedian, just remember the classroom at Welton Academy. Remember those boys standing on desks, their voices trembling but strong. And remember the man who taught them, and us, that sometimes the loudest lesson comes not from shouting, but from daring to believe in something bigger. Oh, Captain, my Captain indeed. Robin Williams in Mrs. Doubtfire, the day Hollywood put him in a dress and made a fortune. By the early 90s, Robin Williams had already proven he could do it all: stand-up, war comedies, poetry-preaching teachers. But in 1993, Hollywood decided to test just how far audiences were willing to go with their beloved funny man. The experiment? Dress him up as a 60-year-old British nanny, slap a wig on his head, and see if the world would buy it. The result? Mrs. Doubtfire, a movie so successful it turned cross-dressing into box office gold. The premise was already absurd. Williams played Daniel Hillard, a recently divorced dad who was so desperate to spend time with his kids that he disguised himself as a dowdy old Scottish housekeeper. It was equal parts heartwarming family story and drag comedy, sprinkled with the kind of slapstick chaos only Robin could deliver. Now, let's talk about that disguise. The transformation into Mrs. Euphigenia Doubtfire wasn't just a quick trip through wardrobe. It was hours in the makeup chair, layers of latex, and enough hairspray to suffocate a small country. Robin would sit for 4 hours every morning while artists glued, powdered, and sculpted his face into grandmotherly perfection. By the end of it, he didn't just look like a convincing old lady, he was one. He'd shuffle around the set in character, startling crew members who forgot it was Robin under there. But here's the thing. The disguise wasn't just physical. Robin threw himself so deep into the role that Mrs. Doubtfire took on a life of her own. She wasn't just a character. She became an alter ego. Between takes, Robin would prank people in full costume, ordering food, chatting up strangers, even wandering into nearby shops as if he were really Euphigenia Doubtfire. Imagine being a cashier in San Francisco in 1993, having no idea you just sold groceries to Robin Williams in drag. And of course, Robin's genius shone brightest in the chaos of improvisation. The dinner scene, where Doubtfire's face melts into the soup because of a hot kitchen? Pure Williams, turning a technical problem with the makeup into comedic gold. The vacuum dance scene? Totally improvised. He didn't just follow the script, he turned the set into his playground, and the cameras were lucky to catch it all. Audiences went wild. Families loved the heartwarming story about a dad reconnecting with his kids. Adults laughed at the absurdity of Robin juggling identities and barely avoiding exposure. And kids? They just thought it was hilarious that a nanny could throw fruit with sniper accuracy. The movie became the second highest-grossing film of 1993, pulling in over $400 million worldwide. Suddenly, cross-dressing wasn't just a gag, it was a blockbuster formula. Of course, critics couldn't resist poking at the darker undertones. Divorce, custody battles, parental neglect. These weren't exactly light-hearted themes. But Robin had a way of balancing it all. He could have you laughing 1 minute and tearing up the next. That scene where Daniel begs the judge for custody, confessing how much he needs his kids? That wasn't Mrs. Doubtfire talking. It was Robin Williams, raw and vulnerable, reminding everyone he wasn't just a clown. Behind the scenes, though, it wasn't all wigs and giggles. The heavy prosthetics took a toll. Robin would overheat under the latex, sometimes needing breaks just to breathe properly. He once joked that wearing the costume was like being buried alive in grandmother skin. And yet he never complained, because if there was one thing Robin loved more than a good gag, it was making kids laugh. And let's not ignore the cultural aftershock. Mrs. Doubtfire became more than a movie. It was an institution. Lines like, "Hello," delivered in that high-pitched Doubtfire voice, became instant catchphrases. The film was quoted at family dinners, in offices, even in courtrooms. Yes, lawyers have actually cited Mrs. Doubtfire during custody battles. Talk about art imitating life. But here's the scandalous truth. As beloved as the movie was, Robin himself had complicated feelings about it. He appreciated the success, sure, but he also bristled at being typecast as the wacky, family-friendly guy. While audiences wanted more Doubtfire hijinks, Robin longed to dig into darker, more challenging roles. He didn't just want to be the funny dad in drag, he wanted to explore the shadows. Still, there's no denying that Mrs. Doubtfire was one of the biggest turning points in his career. It cemented him as a household name, a global superstar who could make kids laugh and parents cry, all while wearing sensible heels. It showed that underneath all the madness, there was a heart, and that's why people kept coming back. Looking back, the film feels almost prophetic. Robin, the man who spent so much of his life hiding pain behind humor, literally hid behind a mask in one of his most famous roles. He became someone else to show love, to connect, to heal. In a way, Mrs. Doubtfire wasn't just a character. It was Robin Williams in a nutshell. A disguise, yes, but one worn out of pure love. So maybe it was silly, maybe it was ridiculous. But it worked. Robin Williams turned a latex mask and a Scottish accent into one of the most beloved films of the 90s. And if that doesn't prove his genius, nothing does. Because only Robin could take heartbreak, hide it under a wig, and make the world laugh until it cried. Robin Williams in Aladdin, the genie who broke Disney, and Hollywood. Rules by 1992, Robin Williams had already conquered live-action Hollywood. He'd played sailors, teachers, DJs, and nannies, but when Disney came knocking with an offer to voice a cartoon genie in Aladdin, even Robin probably didn't realize he was about to change the entire animation industry forever. Let's set the scene. Disney was in the middle of its so-called Renaissance. The Little Mermaid had splashed its way into box office glory, Beauty and the Beast had convinced critics that cartoons could be Oscar-worthy, and Aladdin was supposed to be the next jewel in the crown. The studio needed a genie, big, magical, funny, but not just funny in a dad joke way. They wanted someone who could set the screen on fire. Enter Robin Williams, stage left. Here's where the scandal starts. Robin originally didn't even want the job. He didn't care about the paycheck. He famously accepted a tiny salary compared to his usual fee, just $75,000, because he thought animation was for kids, and he wanted to try something new. His only condition? Disney couldn't use his voice to sell toys, fast food tie-ins, or merchandise. He didn't want his genie hawking plastic figurines at McDonald's. Seems fair, right? Well, more on that betrayal later. Once in the recording booth, Robin didn't just read lines, he detonated them. The script said, "Genie does a bit." Robin said, "Great, I'll do 50. He improvised voices, accents, pop culture references, impressions of celebrities, and characters that weren't even alive in Aladdin's fictional timeline. William F. Buckley, Jack Nicholson, Arnold Schwarzenegger, none of them belonged in Agrabah. And yet Robin threw them all in anyway. The animators? They were both terrified and thrilled. Robin's improvisation gave them hours of material, but it also broke every rule of traditional animation. Normally, characters were tightly scripted and storyboarded. But with Robin, the genie became a rubber band of chaos. Animators admitted they had to throw out chunks of the movie just to keep up with him. One even said, "It wasn't so much that we animated Robin Williams, it was that Robin Williams animated us." Audiences went berserk. Kids loved the genie because he was goofy and colorful. Adults loved him because half the jokes were references only they could understand. Suddenly, Disney movies weren't just for children, they were family events with layers of humor. The genie didn't just steal the show, he was the show. People walked out of theaters quoting Robin's one-liners, humming "Friend Like Me," and wondering how the hell a cartoon character was funnier than half the live-action comedies of the decade. And then came the scandal. Disney broke their promise. Despite Robin's request, the studio plastered his genie all over Happy Meal toys, VHS covers, and ad campaigns. Robin was furious. He felt betrayed, manipulated, and reduced to a marketing gimmick. For a while, he swore off Disney altogether, refusing to work with them again. It got so ugly that Disney had to send him a Picasso painting as an apology. Yes, really. Which is probably the most expensive "sorry bro" in history. But here's the twist. Despite the bad blood, Aladdin turned into a cultural juggernaut. It grossed over $500 million worldwide and won Robin a Golden Globe for his voice performance, proof that a cartoon role could carry as much prestige as a live-action one. Hollywood took notice. Suddenly, A-list actors were lining up to voice animated characters. Without Robin Williams' genie, you wouldn't have Tom Hanks as Woody, Ellen DeGeneres as Dory, or Eddie Murphy as Donkey. Robin kicked down the door, and the entire industry rushed through it. And let's be honest, Aladdin without Robin? Unthinkable. Sure, Disney has recast the genie since then. Will Smith did his best in the live-action remake, bless him. But nothing compares to Robin's manic lightning-in-a-bottle performance. His genie wasn't just funny. He was soulful, mischievous, and strangely wise. Underneath the celebrity impressions and cartoon gags, Robin slipped in real warmth, the kind that made you want to hug a blue, shape-shifting demigod. Looking back, it's easy to see why the genie struck such a chord. Robin himself was a bit of a genie. Unpredictable, larger than life, capable of turning sadness into laughter with a snap of his fingers. But like the genie, he also felt trapped. By fame, by expectations, by contracts that tried to control his wild spirit. Maybe that's why his performance felt so authentic. He wasn't just voicing a character, he was channeling his own restless magic. So yes, Aladdin gave us one of the greatest animated performances in history. It also gave us one of Hollywood's juiciest behind-the-scenes feuds. But more importantly, it gave Robin Williams a chance to etch his legacy into the childhoods of millions. Kids in the 90s didn't just grow up with the genie. They grew up with Robin Williams, even if they didn't know it at the time. And maybe that's the greatest trick of all. He didn't just lend his voice to a cartoon. He breathed a soul into it. He made animation grow up. He made comedy timeless. Robin Williams didn't just play the genie, he was the genie. And to this day, we still don't have a friend like him. Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting, the therapist who finally got his own therapy. By the late 90s, Robin Williams had already proven he could do anything. Make kids laugh as a blue genie, make parents cry as a drag queen nanny, and make teachers look cool with some poetry and a few desk jumps. But in 1997, he took on a role that felt eerily close to home. A broken, grieving therapist in Good Will Hunting. It wasn't just another movie for him. It was the film that finally gave him the Oscar and cemented his place in Hollywood history as more than the funny guy with the voices. Let's rewind. Good Will Hunting wasn't supposed to be a big blockbuster. It was a scrappy script written by two unknown actors, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, who were still sleeping on friends' couches and pretending they knew how Hollywood worked. The story was simple but powerful. A South Boston janitor with genius-level math skills, Damon, gets therapy from a widowed psychology professor, Williams. Sounds straightforward, right? Wrong. This was a 1-2 punch of brains and heart, and Robin Williams was the emotional anchor. His character, Sean Maguire, wasn't your typical Hollywood shrink. No clean office, no fancy jargon. Instead, Sean swore, smoked, and wore his grief on his sleeve. He was a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer, and instead of healing himself, he buried the pain under layers of sarcasm and whiskey. For once, Robin didn't play a manic whirlwind of energy. He played a man sitting still with his sadness, and it was devastatingly good. And let's talk about that scene. You know the one. Sean and Will sit on a park bench, and Robin delivers a monologue that could stop traffic. He tells Will that genius doesn't mean a damn thing if you've never really lived. "You're just a kid," he says, ripping Damon's character apart without ever raising his voice. The monologue wasn't in the original script the way we saw it. Robin improvised parts, drawing on his own pain, his own losses. When he talked about love, grief, and waking up next to someone you adore, that wasn't acting. That was Robin speaking through Sean. The result: chills. Audiences cried. Critics couldn't stop praising it. That single scene became one of the most iconic moments in 90s cinema. Suddenly, Robin Williams wasn't just the clown who wore wigs or made cartoon voices. He was an actor who could crush your soul with a whisper. And then came the other unforgettable moment. "It's not your fault." Over and over Sean repeats it to Will, breaking through the young man's walls until he finally collapses into tears. Watching Damon cry was powerful, sure, but watching Robin say those words with such raw gentleness was like seeing a man forgive himself in real time. The irony, of course, is that Robin himself spent much of his life struggling with guilt, addiction, and inner demons. When he said, "It's not your fault," it felt like he was talking to himself as much as to the character in front of him. The Academy took notice. In 1998, Robin Williams finally won his first, and only, Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. The funny man with the manic energy, the impersonations, the boundless charisma had finally been recognized for his depth. He got a standing ovation, and when he stood on stage clutching that golden statue, you could see it in his eyes. This one mattered. Of course, the Hollywood machine being what it is, people immediately started whispering. Was Robin done with comedy? Would he only do sad, serious roles now? Was this his midlife reinvention? Naturally, Robin being Robin, he went back to juggling both. He did serious films, sure, but he never gave up the comedy. The Oscar didn't tame him, it just proved what fans already knew: he could do everything. But behind the triumph, there was also a bittersweet note. Playing Sean Maguire seemed to peel back layers of Robin's own grief. Friends later said the role hit close to home, stirring up emotions he usually kept buried. It was therapy through performance, but therapy that didn't necessarily heal. Watching the movie now, with the knowledge of Robin's own tragic end, those quiet moments, him talking about loss, about love, about resilience, feel like cries from a man who knew pain all too well. Still, Good Will Hunting remains one of Robin's crowning achievements. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't full of zany impressions, and it didn't rely on slapstick. It was quiet, thoughtful, deeply human. It was Robin Williams proving, once and for all, that he didn't need a genie lamp or a fake British accent to captivate audiences. All he needed was honesty. So yes, Robin finally got his Oscar. But more than that, he got respect. The kind of respect that sticks, the kind that tells the world. This man wasn't just here to make us laugh. He was here to make us feel. And maybe that's the ultimate punchline. For decades, Robin Williams was the master of voices, the man of 1,000 faces. But in Good Will Hunting, he dropped the act. He gave us his real voice, and it won him the only award that truly mattered. Because sometimes the funniest man in the room doesn't need to tell a joke. Sometimes all he needs to say is, "It's not your fault." Robin Williams may have been the guy who wore suspenders on Mork and Mindy and voiced a genie that turned into a dozen accents per minute. But when it came to spending money, he was not joking around. Behind the clown mask was a man with a serious taste for expensive toys, grand houses, and timepieces so fancy they could probably tell you not just the time, but also your horoscope. If you thought Robin's biggest purchases were just gag props and rubber chickens, let me shatter that illusion right now. The man collected luxuries with the same intensity he delivered one-liners. Let's start with the palaces. Forget the image of the humble comic in a cardigan. Williams and his second wife Marcia bought a mansion in San Francisco's posh Seacliff neighborhood, back in 1991 for around $3.2 million. Sounds impressive enough, right? Well, by the time it was sold in January 2025, the price tag had ballooned to $18.1 million. And what did you get for that kind of money? Oh, just a Renaissance-style villa with nearly 11,000 square feet, secret rooms. Yes, really. A wine cellar, a library, and sweeping views of the Golden Gate Bridge. Basically, Batman's lair with better lighting. It was in this house that Robin raised his kids, because nothing says family bonding like playing hide-and-seek in a mansion with secret passageways. But wait, Seacliff was just one address on his Monopoly board. Williams also owned a sprawling estate in Napa Valley, appropriately named Villa Sorriso, Villa of Smiles. That one came with 640 acres of land, its own vineyard, horse stables, a library, a movie theater, and a pool that probably had a better filtration system than most city reservoirs. Initially listed for $35 million, it eventually sold for about $18.1 million. Apparently, even in death, Robin knew how to get a bargain. Imagine sipping wine from your own grapes while watching Mrs. Doubtfire in a private theater. That's not just luxury, that's self-care on steroids. Of course, the man didn't stop at real estate. He also had a taste for watches. Lots of them. At Sotheby's, more than 40 timepieces from his collection went under the hammer, fetching a total of about $445,000. And these weren't just your everyday Rolexes. We're talking white gold tourbillons, minute repeaters, and most famously, a humble Hamilton quartz watch he wore in Dead Poets Society. Originally estimated at a couple of grand, it sold for a jaw-dropping $32,500. Yes, a quartz watch that probably ticked louder than your wall clock ended up being worth more than a Tesla. That's the power of cinema, and nostalgia for a movie where Robin tells you to seize the day. Apparently, collectors seized it with both hands. His priciest watch at auction? A white gold beauty with complications that sounded like the menu of a Michelin-starred restaurant. Tourbillon, minute repeater, perpetual calendar. That one alone went for $52,500. For context, that's roughly the same price as buying a brand new BMW. But hey, Robin also had bikes, lots of them. Among his collection was a rare BMW R62 motorcycle, valued at around $25,000. Because why just tell jokes about fast living when you can actually speed down the California coast on a vintage bike? Then there was his art. Robin and Marcia were serious collectors, amassing around 300 pieces ranging from Banksy's cheeky street art to Dale Chihuly's glass sculptures. It was an eclectic mix, much like Robin's career. Half Shakespeare, half cartoon voices, sprinkled with chaos. His taste in decor wasn't always highbrow, though. Alongside fine art, he owned whimsical furniture, quirky armchairs, and sports memorabilia. It was as if his home was part gallery, part playground, part mad scientist's lab. The irony in all of this? Despite the mansions, the watches, the wine estates, Robin never seemed like the typical Hollywood diva. He didn't parade his wealth the way some stars do. If anything, he treated his luxuries the way he treated his comedy. With a wink. The houses were for his family, the art reflected his quirky imagination. And the watches? Well, maybe they were just a reminder that even the funniest man alive couldn't out-tick the clock. So, what do we make of Robin Williams the Spender? He wasn't reckless in a Nicolas Cage, I bought a dinosaur skull way. His purchases had class, history, and sometimes even a touch of sentimentality. A $32,000 Hamilton quartz watch is absurd, yes, but it was tied to one of his most iconic roles. A Napa estate named Villa of Smiles wasn't just branding, it was a reflection of the life he tried to create. And in a strange way, his biggest purchases weren't just about showing off wealth. They were about building sanctuaries where he could escape, play, and maybe, just maybe, quiet that sadness he carried inside. Robin Williams left behind more than laughter. He left behind palaces, vineyards, timepieces, and art collections. But above all, he left behind the image of a man who could buy everything, yet still understood that the most valuable currency was laughter. And that's probably the most ironic purchase of all. He could fill his life with millions of dollars worth of mansions and luxury, but the thing he gave away for free was what we'll remember forever. Robin Williams wasn't just the manic genie, the cross-dressing nanny, or the fast-talking alien. He was also a man who bought himself a kingdom, and then named it Villa Sorriso, which translates to House of Smiles. If that isn't the most Robin Williams thing ever, I don't know what is. Of course, the House of Smiles wasn't some cozy little cabin where he could sip tea and write jokes. No, this was Napa Valley, darling. Wine country for the rich, famous, and slightly unhinged. Picture this, 640 acres of land. That's not a backyard, that's a zip code. Robin's estate sprawled across rolling hills like a scene from a movie where the protagonist inherits a magical vineyard and suddenly discovers the meaning of life. The property came with everything a Hollywood star could ever want. A vineyard producing its own wine, stables for horses, because why just ride a bike when you can gallop through your private ranch? A library big enough to get lost in, and naturally, a full-blown movie theater. Yes, Robin Williams could watch Good Will Hunting in his own cinema while probably cracking jokes about his own performance. And let's not forget the pool. Not just any pool, but the kind you'd expect to see in a resort brochure. The kind of pool where you don't just swim, you take a dip while holding a glass of wine from grapes grown a few steps away. Because nothing says, "I've made it," quite like drinking your own vineyard's Cabernet while floating in a multi-million-dollar water feature. Originally, this mansion of joy and extravagance hit the market for a jaw-dropping $35 million. That's the kind of money entire neighborhoods are built on. But life, like comedy, has its punchlines. After Robin's death, the estate lingered on the market like an unfunny joke told at the wrong time. Years later, it finally sold for about $18.1 million, a bargain, really, if you consider $18 million pocket change. Now, the funny part is that despite its grandeur, Villa Sorriso wasn't about showing off. Robin didn't seem like the type to host Gatsby-style parties with champagne fountains and models by the pool. No, his House of Smiles was more like a sanctuary, a place to escape the noise of Hollywood, to spend time with family, maybe even to battle the inner demons that fame never quite silences. It was Robin's retreat, his castle, his oversized safety blanket made of bricks, wine barrels, and expensive landscaping. Of course, the name itself, Villa Sorriso, sounds almost ironic now. Smiles were what Robin gave the world, effortlessly and endlessly. He could make a crowd laugh until they cried, but behind the gates of his Napa palace, he was just another man looking for a little peace. Maybe that's why the place feels so symbolic. It wasn't just a mansion. It was Robin's attempt to create a world where joy was permanent, where the laughter never stopped, where the smiles were built into the very walls. And yet, even with its vineyard, theater, and stables, the villa couldn't fix the one thing money never can: the weight of sadness. That's the cruel irony of it all. Robin had everything: wealth, fame, an estate fit for royalty. But happiness remained elusive. Villa Sorriso, the House of Smiles, is now just another luxury property passed from one wealthy owner to another. But its story is forever tied to a man who made the world laugh while quietly building a fortress to protect himself from the silence. When you think about it, the villa is the perfect metaphor for Robin Williams' life. Enormous, eclectic, full of wonder, and yet hiding a bittersweet truth behind its grand facade. On paper, it was paradise. Acres of vines, horses, a library, and a theater. In reality, it was just another reminder that no matter how much land you own, no matter how fine the wine, you can't buy peace of mind. Still, the fact that Robin chose to call it the House of Smiles says everything. He knew the value of joy. even if he couldn't always keep it for himself. And maybe that's why his villa matters more than its price tag. It wasn't just a property, it was his way of saying to the world, laughter should be your foundation, joy should be your estate, and smiles are worth more than millions. So yes, Robin Williams once owned a $35 million villa with its own vineyard. Yes, it sold for only $18 million. But the true worth of Villa Ceriso? It was the place where one of the greatest comedians of all time tried to live up to the name he gave it. A house of smiles for a man who gave away more of them than he ever got back. And if that isn't the saddest punchline in Hollywood, I don't know what is. If you thought Robin Williams only collected laughs, you'd be wrong. The man also collected watches. Lots of them. Not the plastic kind you win at a carnival either, but the kind of timepieces that whisper old money every time you glance at them. And in true Hollywood fashion, his personal watch collection eventually ended up under the hammer at Sotheby's, where more than 40 of his prized pieces sold for a total of about $445,000. Yes, nearly $500,000 for the TikTok accessories of a man who spent most of his life making fun of his own fame. Now, Robin didn't buy watches like some people buy milk, out of necessity. He bought them the way an artist buys paint. Each one seemed to reflect a mood, a role, or a side of his wildly layered personality. Think of it this way. Some people collect sneakers, others collect stamps, and Robin Williams collected finely crafted, jaw-droppingly expensive reminders that time is always running out. Irony much. Let's start with the star of the show, a humble Hamilton quartz watch he wore during the filming of Dead Poets Society. Nothing flashy, no bling, just a straightforward watch that probably ticked louder than it should. Estimated at a couple of grand, it shocked everyone by selling for $32,500. Why? Because it wasn't just a watch. It was the watch that sat on Robin's wrist when he told us to seize the day. And apparently, collectors took that advice literally. Nothing screams carpe diem quite like dropping 30 grand on a quartz watch that originally retailed for less than your monthly rent. Then there were the heavy hitters. White gold tourbillons, perpetual calendars, minute repeaters. The kind of watches that don't just tell the time, they announce it with a miniature symphony. One of his priciest? A white gold piece that went for $52,500. For that price, you could buy yourself a brand new luxury car. But let's be real. Cars break down. Robin's watch. That was eternal, at least until the next auction. But the fun of Robin's collection wasn't just in the luxury, it was in the eclectic taste. He wasn't the type of guy to stick to one brand like a loyal Rolex groupie. No, his collection was a chaotic comedy show in itself. High-end tourbillons sat next to funky, more affordable models. Expensive Swiss masterpieces mingled with quirky, everyday watches. It was almost like his wardrobe of characters. Sometimes he was Mrs. Doubtfire in pearls, sometimes he was the dark photo clerk in 1 Hour Photo, and sometimes he was just Robin, the guy in a simple quartz Hamilton. Here's where the irony kicks in. Robin Williams, a man who struggled deeply with the passage of time, who wrestled with aging, addiction, and depression, owned dozens of exquisite instruments designed solely to measure time. It's poetic in a slightly twisted way. While the world was watching his movies, Robin was busy amassing a collection of tiny ticking reminders that time doesn't stop for anyone, not even the funniest man alive. Of course, the auction itself turned into a kind of performance. Collectors weren't just buying watches, they were buying stories, memories, and pieces of a man who gave them decades of laughter. Every watch that left Sotheby's carried with it the aura of Robin's manic energy and heartbreaking humanity. A Hamilton became more than a watch. It became a relic. A gold tourbillon wasn't just a complication, it was a piece of Robin's complicated soul. And yet, despite the big numbers and fancy names, the collection as a whole sold for what many hedge fund types would consider pocket money. $445,000 might sound like a fortune to the rest of us, but in the world of celebrity memorabilia and Swiss luxury timepieces, it's almost modest. You get the sense Robin didn't collect watches to flaunt them or show off his wealth. He collected them because they fascinated him, maybe even comforted him. In a life where everything moved at a manic speed, maybe a watch was his way of slowing down, of holding on to something precise and constant. So, what's the takeaway from Robin Williams' watch collection? Simple. The man who gave the world countless laughs also gave Sotheby's a reason to set new records. His 40-plus watches became symbols, not just of wealth, but of time itself, the one thing Robin never had enough of. And if that doesn't make you want to check your wrist and seize the day, I don't know what will. If you ever needed proof that Robin Williams lived life with the same chaotic brilliance he brought to the screen, look no further than his wrist. Forget diamond chains or gold-plated cars. Robin's guilty pleasure came in the form of tiny, ticking masterpieces that cost more than most people's homes. Yes, the man who gave us Mrs. Doubtfire and the Genie was also a proud owner of a watch collection that could make even the snobbiest Swiss collector raise an eyebrow. And the crown jewel of that collection? A white gold tourbillon with a minute repeater, which later sold for a cool $52,500. Now, let's pause for a second. For that money, you could buy a Tesla, or pay off your student loans, or purchase enough instant ramen to survive the next 2 apocalypses. But Robin? He chose a watch that didn't just tell the time, but sang it back to you. That's right, this wasn't your average TikTok. This was horological theatre. With a minute repeater, you press a button and the watch literally chimes out the hours, quarters, and minutes like a miniature grandfather clock strapped to your arm. Because why should you squint at numbers when your jewelry can serenade you with the passage of time? And then there's the tourbillon, a spinning cage inside the watch designed to counteract gravity and make it more precise. It's basically the Rolex equivalent of a flex. Is it necessary? Not really. Does it scream, "I've made it in Hollywood and I'm bored of buying houses"? Absolutely. Robin didn't just want to own time, he wanted to own time's most complicated party trick. But here's where it gets really ironic. This watch, this $52,500 miracle of engineering, sat on the wrist of a man who spent his whole life fighting against the clock. Fame, addiction, depression. Robin knew all too well that time is a ruthless little tyrant. And yet he surrounded himself with devices designed to measure, beautify, and even sing the minutes away. You can't write a more bittersweet metaphor than that. What makes this even juicier is that Robin didn't flaunt his watches like other celebrities. You wouldn't catch him dangling his wrist in every paparazzi photo like some rapper with a diamond-encrusted Audemars. No, Robin's watch game was subtle, the kind of subtle that whispers, "This cost more than your car, but I'm not going to rub it in." His tourbillon repeater wasn't an accessory. It was a private indulgence, a secret luxury in a life otherwise filled with giving laughter away for free. When the watch eventually hit the Sotheby's auction block, it wasn't just collectors bidding on a piece of white gold with complicated gears. They were bidding on Robin's story. They were bidding on the same wrist that once hugged kids, signed autographs, and waved around while he improvised his way into our hearts. Suddenly, $50,500 didn't seem so much for something that carried a sliver of that energy. And let's not forget, this wasn't even the only watch in his arsenal. Robin's collection included over 40 pieces, everything from modest quartz beaters to horological heavyweights. Together they sold for about $400,000 to $45,000, a tidy sum, sure, but still not outrageous compared to what celebrity memorabilia usually fetches. Which just goes to show, people weren't buying the watches. They were buying the man behind them. The best part? His most expensive, most complex piece wasn't necessarily the most iconic. That honor went to a humble Hamilton quartz watch he wore in Dead Poets Society. It sold for $32,500, nearly as much as the white gold repeater, simply because it was tied to Robin's immortal Carpe Diem moment. Proof, once again, that in the end, the story is worth more than the specs. So what can we take from this? Robin Williams, the man of boundless energy and bottomless humor, collected watches like he collected characters, some simple, some wildly complicated, all fascinating in their own right. His $52,500 white gold tourbillon repeater wasn't just a watch. It was Robin's quiet wink to the absurdity of life. After all, what's funnier than paying the price of a luxury car for a device that politely chimes the time while the rest of us are still squinting at our iPhones? Maybe that's the real punchline. Robin Williams could make time itself dance, whether through a joke, a character, or a white gold contraption with more gears than a Ferrari engine. And in the end, that $52,500 wasn't really about gold or gravity-defying mechanics. It was about one man's lifelong struggle to find joy in the ticking seconds he made brighter for the rest of us. And Robin Williams, the man who could make a stadium laugh until its walls cracked, also knew how to send tabloids into a feeding frenzy. Forget Oscar speeches and sold-out comedy shows. The real show was what went on behind his white picket fences. And nothing screamed front page louder than the scandal that detonated his first marriage, the infamous affair with the nanny. Yes, the very person paid to look after his kid ended up looking after him too, in ways not listed on the job description. Let's rewind. Back in the late 1970s, Robin married Valerie Velarde, a dancer with bohemian charm who claimed she could handle his wandering eye. Translation: Robin had a reputation for being a bit of a free spirit, on and off stage, and Valerie tolerated more than most wives ever would. But by the 1980s, Robin wasn't just Hollywood's funnyman. He was also swimming in cash, fame, and temptations. And temptations don't exactly wait patiently at the door. They invite themselves in, sometimes literally. Enter Marcia Garces, the nanny. While Robin was filming, touring, or just zipping around being the clown prince of comedy, Marcia was at home taking care of little Zachary, Robin's son. Somewhere between bedtime stories and household errands, sparks flew, and not the kind you blow out on a birthday cake. Soon, whispers turned into roars, and Valerie suddenly found herself living in a soap opera she hadn't signed up for. Here's the kicker. Valerie admitted in interviews that she tolerated Robin's affairs because she understood what came with the package of marrying a rising superstar. That's Hollywood for you, shrugging off cheating like it's a line on a resume. But when Marcia, the nanny, got pregnant, even Valerie had to draw the line. This wasn't a fling with a cocktail waitress in Vegas. This was the woman folding her kids' laundry. It's one thing to cheat. It's another to cheat so close to home that the scandal practically serves itself breakfast in your kitchen. By 1988, Valerie filed for divorce, and Robin walked straight into his second marriage. Yes, with Marcia. Imagine the headlines. Nanny to wife, how Robin's home help became Mrs. Williams. You couldn't script it better for a soap opera, but Hollywood didn't need to. Robin lived it. And of course, with Hollywood divorces come Hollywood-sized bills. Robin once joked that alimony was like ripping your heart out through your wallet, and boy, did he live that punchline. The first divorce cost him millions, though, to be fair, he was already rolling in more cash than most of us will ever see in a lifetime. Still, nothing drains the humor out of a comedian faster than watching the zeros pile up on a divorce settlement. But here's where it gets even juicier. Despite the mess, Robin and Valerie somehow stayed on relatively good terms. She later described him as a man with a beautiful spirit who just couldn't help himself. Translation: She forgave him, the tabloids didn't, and Robin carried the nanny scandal around like a badge of messy Hollywood honor. Marcia, for her part, wasn't just a nanny-turned-wife. She became Robin's business partner, producing some of his films and sticking by his side for nearly 2 decades before their own marriage crashed in 2008. Talk about a career upgrade. Few nannies have gone from bedtime routines to red carpets, but Marcia pulled it off with style. The scandal, though, left a permanent mark on Robin's public persona. For all his genius on stage and screen, he was suddenly humanized in a very messy, very public way. He wasn't just the guy with 1,000 voices, he was also the guy who couldn't keep his personal life from turning into a circus. It showed us that behind the rapid-fire jokes and manic energy was a man as flawed, impulsive, and reckless as the rest of us, maybe even more so. Looking back, the nanny affair scandal was one of those moments where Robin's real life felt stranger than any of his characters. Mork from Ork could get away with chaos because it was scripted. Robin Williams, the man, had no script, and when he improvised, it sometimes blew up spectacularly. But here's the thing. Audiences never stopped loving him. Sure, the scandal fed gossip columns for years, but Robin's charisma was bulletproof. People forgave him because he could make them laugh, cry, and believe in magic again. The affair might have been messy, but Robin himself remained unforgettable. In the end, the nanny scandal wasn't just about a broken marriage. It was about the collision of fame, temptation, and the inability of even the funniest man alive to laugh his way out of his own flaws. Robin Williams could play a genie, a teacher, even a cross-dressing nanny. But when the scandal spotlight turned on him, he was just another man in Hollywood making very human mistakes. And maybe that's why we still talk about it. Because sometimes the funniest people carry the messiest stories, and Robin's, as always, was one hell of a performance. When you think of Robin Williams, you probably picture the manic genie in Aladdin, the heartwarming teacher from Dead Poets Society, or the lovable nanny in drag from Mrs. Doubtfire. What you don't immediately picture is a courtroom, a cocktail waitress, and a herpes scandal. But oh yes, even the man who could make you laugh until you cried had his share of very unfunny headlines. The year was 1986, and Robin was at the peak of his fame. He had money, movies, fans throwing themselves at him, and apparently some baggage he wasn't keen on disclosing. Enter Michelle Tish Carter, a cocktail waitress who claimed she got more than laughs from her fling with Robin. According to her, he failed to mention he was carrying herpes before they started their relationship, and she said she ended up infected. Now, celebrity lawsuits are nothing new, but this one had the perfect cocktail, pun intended, of scandal ingredients: a Hollywood star, a waitress with a story, a sexually transmitted infection, and a court battle. Forget romantic comedies. This was tragicomedy at its finest. Carter filed a lawsuit accusing Robin of not being honest about his health, essentially claiming he gave her a lifetime subscription to something she never asked for. And the press? Oh, they had a field day. Headlines were popping up faster than Robin's one-liners on stage. Comedians in smoky clubs whispered jokes about Robin's unwanted punchlines, while gossip magazines plastered his face across covers with lurid headlines about disease and betrayal. The case didn't go to trial. It settled out of court, which, of course, is Hollywood speak for. We're not admitting guilt, but here's a fat check to make this go away quietly. And while the exact settlement amount was never revealed, you can bet it wasn't pocket change. Robin had the kind of bank account that could cushion blows most people would never recover from. And this was one of those moments where money talked louder than words. But the damage wasn't just financial. This scandal cemented Robin as not just the funny man with lightning-fast wit, but also the flawed, messy human who couldn't control the chaos of his personal life. It painted a picture of a guy who, for all his brilliance on stage, sometimes let impulse rule his private world. Of course, Robin wasn't the first or last celebrity to get tangled in a herpes lawsuit. The 80s and 90s were practically a golden era for Hollywood scandal. Actors, rock stars, and athletes were constantly dragged into court over affairs, broken promises, and more intimate betrayals. But Robin's case stood out because he was supposed to be the sweet, goofy clown. the guy you'd trust with your kids in Mrs. Doubtfire, the genie who granted wishes, the teacher who inspired you to carpe diem. And suddenly here he was, splashed across papers with a story that was anything but family-friendly. Did it ruin his career? Not even close. If anything, Robin had the rare kind of star power that could survive a scandal like this. Fans still showed up to theaters, still tuned in to his stand-up, still adored him. In fact, some argued that the herpes lawsuit only added to the mystique, the sense that Robin was a wild, unpredictable genius whose personal life was as chaotic as his stage persona. And let's be honest, Robin himself probably laughed about it later. If anyone could turn an STD lawsuit into material, it was him. You can almost imagine him on stage. "I got sued for herpes. Talk about a gift that keeps on giving." It's dark humor, sure, but it's exactly the kind of line Robin would have thrown out to disarm an awkward subject. Still, this wasn't just a tabloid blip. It was another piece in the puzzle of Robin's complicated, messy life. Alongside the nanny affair, the divorces that cost him millions, and the addiction struggles that nearly consumed him, the herpes lawsuit was one of those moments that reminded the world. Behind the genius, there was a flawed man making very flawed choices. The lawsuit may have been settled and buried, but it lingers in the archives of Hollywood scandals as one of those bizarre, eyebrow-raising stories that you almost can't believe happened. Robin Williams, the manic genius, in court over herpes. You couldn't script it better if you tried. In the end, the herpes scandal didn't define Robin Williams, but it definitely exposed the cracks behind the laughter. He wasn't just the genie or the funny guy on late-night talk shows. He was also a man navigating fame, temptation, and the consequences of his own impulses. And like so many of his best performances, it was messy, unpredictable, and unforgettable. Because if there's one thing Robin taught us, even scandals come with a punchline. Our mentor Robin Williams could make a stadium roar with laughter, but when it came to his divorces, the only sound was the car-ching of cash registers draining his fortune. Forget comedy. Robin's real-life marital splits were tragic slapstick routines, except instead of cream pies to the face, it was checks worth tens of millions sliding across lawyers' desks. Let's start with marriage number 1, Valerie Velarde. She was there from the early days, the wife who put up with Robin's rising fame, chaotic lifestyle, and a wandering eye that wandered right into the arms of their nanny. Valerie, bless her patience, tolerated a lot until she couldn't anymore. When she filed for divorce in 1988, she didn't just walk away with memories, she walked away with millions. Nobody knows the exact figure, but it was hefty enough to make Robin crack his famous line, "Divorce is expensive. I used to joke it's ripping your heart out through your wallet. Now I know it's true." But Robin didn't learn the first time. Oh no, he went straight back into the marriage game. Enter wife number 2, Marcia Garces, the very nanny who sparked the collapse of his first marriage. Talk about plot twists worthy of a sitcom. Robin and Marcia lasted almost 2 decades, which in Hollywood time is practically a golden anniversary. But when that marriage unraveled in 2008, it wasn't just love that disappeared. It was another giant chunk of his bank account. Divorce number 2 was brutal. Reports say Robin forked out between $20 million and $30 million across both divorces combined, and most of that tsunami of cash went during his split with Marcia. Lawyers probably threw parties in his honor. Judges probably thought, well, someone's comedy career really paid off. Robin himself joked that he was the patron saint of alimony. And he wasn't wrong. Now let's pause here. Imagine making Good Morning, Vietnam, Mrs. Doubtfire, Dead Poets Society, and then watching most of those box office millions evaporate into legal settlements and monthly checks. Robin once admitted that money wasn't everything, but it sure was painful when he had to part with so much of it. His divorces didn't just cost him cash, they forced him to work harder, longer, and take roles he might have skipped otherwise. Ever wondered why he popped up in so many random movies in the 2000s? Hint, it wasn't just artistic curiosity. And because Hollywood loves irony, Robin's roles sometimes mirrored his personal disasters. Take Mrs. Doubtfire, where he played a dad in disguise just to be near his kids after a divorce. Audiences cried, critics applauded, and Robin laughed all the way to the bank. Or rather, laughed as he watched the bank account shrink thanks to real-life custody battles and settlements. His third marriage to Susan Schneider was the calmest of them all. No alimony circus, no lawsuits, no headline-grabbing battles. But by then, Robin was already battle-scarred by decades of expensive heartbreak. He openly admitted that financial strain from divorces made him keep hustling in Hollywood, even when his health and energy were slipping. He once quipped, "Divorce is like mining your wallet with a pickaxe," repeatedly. If anyone knew, it was him. Here's the thing, though. People still loved him. While other celebrities got dragged through the mud for nasty breakups, Robin somehow managed to remain the goofy, lovable genius. He could pay $30 million in divorce settlements and still make fans feel like he was the guy next door cracking jokes at the barbecue. It was almost as if the public accepted his messiness because it made him human. Proof that even the funniest man alive couldn't laugh away the pain of love gone wrong. In the end, Robin's divorces weren't just scandals. They were expensive reminders that fame doesn't protect you from heartbreak, and comedy doesn't soften the sting of a lawyer's invoice. He left behind a legacy of laughter, but also a financial cautionary tale. If you're going to be Robin Williams, prepare to spend millions on both the laughs and the love. Because sometimes the biggest punchline of all is the one you never wanted to hear, delivered by your divorce attorney. If you thought Robin Williams's energy on stage came only from talent and caffeine, think again. In the late 70s and early 80s, his manic brilliance was riding shotgun with something far darker, cocaine. Lots of it. The same man who made children laugh as Mork from Ork was, behind closed doors, shoving enough powder up his nose to make Scarface raise an eyebrow. Robin was honest, sometimes too honest, about his demons. He once confessed, "I can't go on without the blow," a line that sounds like it came from a tragic stand-up routine, but was, in fact, his reality. The man who could improvise 10 characters in a single sentence wasn't just fueled by creativity. He was burning gasoline spiked with cocaine. Friends remembered him at parties as a whirlwind, electric, unstoppable, bouncing off walls. But they also remembered the crashes, the lows, the moments where he looked less like the world's funniest man and more like someone quietly falling apart. The irony is, Robin was never a cool cokehead like some rock stars who wore their drug use like a badge of rebellion. No, for Robin, it was self-destruction in disguise. He didn't look glamorous with it, he looked haunted. His highs were stratospheric, but his lows were the kind of silent battles you wouldn't wish on anyone. And let's not sugarcoat it. Hollywood in the 70s and 80s was practically a cocaine buffet. If you weren't snorting lines in the bathroom between takes, were you even famous? Robin wasn't alone, but his addiction hit harder because his comedy was already manic by nature. Add coke to that equation, and you got the human equivalent of a tornado. Funny, yes, but terrifying when the storm settled. Then came the gut punch, the death of his friend John Belushi in 1982. Belushi, another comedy legend, died of a drug overdose after a night that also included Robin. That moment shook him to the core. Robin saw the endgame of cocaine culture up close, and it scared him straight, at least for a while. He pulled back, sobered up, tried to bury the monster. But addiction is like a bad sequel. It always finds a way to return. Robin's battle with drugs wasn't just about the substances. It was about the void he was trying to fill. For someone who could light up a room of strangers, he carried an ocean of loneliness inside. Coke gave him the illusion of control, the rush of invincibility. But as soon as the high wore off, the darkness came creeping back, heavier than before. By the 90s, Robin had crafted an image of the lovable clown who conquered his demons. But behind the smiles, there were relapses, quiet rehab stays, whispered interventions from friends who loved him enough to call him out. He wasn't just fighting addiction, he was fighting the shame that came with it. Hollywood forgives a lot, but in Robin's mind, being the funny guy with a drug problem wasn't the role he wanted to play. The saddest part? His addiction made him, in his own words, a monster. That's how he described himself when the drugs were in charge. A monster. Imagine the pain of being Robin Williams, beloved worldwide, adored by fans, idolized by peers, and still feeling like a beast when the high wore off. Of course, the tabloids loved it. Stories of Robin's cocaine use were whispered in gossip columns, paired with photos of his bug-eyed expressions as if to say, "See, we told you he was high." They reduced a very real struggle into clickbait long before clickbait was even a word. But here's the twist. Robin survived what many of his peers didn't. He clawed his way back, leaned on rehab, on friends, on sheer stubbornness. He turned his pain into performances that still make people cry today. And maybe that's why fans forgave him for the dark years, because they saw the humanity behind the scandal. Still, those years left scars. Addiction never really disappears. It lurks, waiting. And for Robin, it was always part of the shadow behind the spotlight. His coke-fueled chaos may have fueled some of his brilliance, but it also stole years of peace, trust, and health. So when we laugh at his wildest stand-up sets from the early days, it's worth remembering. That manic, unstoppable energy wasn't just comedy genius. It was also a man trying to outrun his demons, one line, of jokes or of powder, at a time.